Hello, right now we're back to the fifth primary basis about pi 911 F9 67 IDs and martinadors. So the previous video was about that, and this is the continuous video. Um, so we're back to the three Paul shipwrecks, and the three Paul shipwrecks is a prophecy for the end times, and back in the fall of Genesis 3, Eve and Adam, they were covered with fig leaves, and fig leaves represent Israel, and Eve represents California, and Adam represents New York City. So these are the two high places America, located in both the west and the east coast, and California locates on the west, and Eve means night and darkness, and it exactly resembles the meaning of west, that is the direction of darkness. And ironically, that the headquarters of the Apple company, the beaten Apple logo, is depicting Eve, who first ate forbidden fruit. So with New York City, it locates on the east, and Adam was often associated with east. And I believe that Genesis 4 is the behind the scene clue to Genesis 3 as well. And a lot of similarities between Genesis 4 and Genesis 3. Relation to Adam and Cain, and Eve with Abel. So in Genesis chapter 3 verse 24 says that Adam was placed at the east of the Garden of Eden. So Cain represents Adam and Abel represents Eve, and both of them got a lot of similarities. And the name Eve means to breathe, and Abel's name means breath. So there are a lot of similarities between them, and Eve was the second formed, and Abel was the second born, and Cain was the firstborn, and Adam was the first formed. Adam means man, and Cain was a man from the Lord in Genesis chapter 4 verse 1. And Cain was a tiller of the ground, and Adam was too a tiller of the ground. And both Cain and Adam went to the east side. It's described in both chapters. So it's kind of uncovering the mystery behind Adam's first transgression, according to Romans 5:12. It says that Scripture says that through one man's sin entered into the world. So it was not one woman's sin, but it was through one man's sin. So even though many blame Eve for the original sin because she took the fruit first, but if you notice in Genesis chapter 3 verse 6 that Adam was with Eve all the time when the serpent caused Eve to take the fruit, you can notice that her husband did not help her by defending the serpent. And if you use the King James version, it's pretty useful because it shows the singular and plural form of speech. And back in Genesis chapter 3 verse 1, Satan, when he was talking to the woman, he used the word in plural form. It was ye and not thou. So he's proving that he was talking to more than one person. So who did God talk to first after the fall? You do notice that God talked to Adam first alone. So he too was driven out of the garden because it was saying that the man and it was not the woman herself. So, and when you look into the judgments between Adam and Eve, well, first of all, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, saying that Eve will bring forth children in sorrow, and it's important to go back to the original Hebrew and the word children. Actually, in Hebrew, was specifically saying sons, and so there are completely different meanings when you say children and sons. They're similar, but they're completely different. So it was kind of like a prophecy to Eve that she will give birth to two sons. One of them will kill another, which Cain killed Abel, and so that was the result in her sorrows because she loved both of her sons. So moving forward, there was only one single verse for the woman in the judgment, and 3 verses for the man. And so back in Genesis 3, it says that that Eve was saying that even touching of the tree would result death, and wouldn't that be exaggerating the command of God? Because God, back in Genesis 2, he clearly did not say that touching the tree would result in death. So one possible way that Eve knew about his command was probably through Adam, because there's nowhere in the scriptures that talked about Eve who was commanded of God about the tree, but it was very clear that back in Genesis 2 that Adam was commanded of the tree. So the reason I wanted to talk about the mirroring of Genesis 3 and 4 and the relation, and that they're very linked together because the number 3 and 4 are very important, just as I've shown in previous video about the code 34, and when they're merging together, there are meanings behind that. And so there was the numbers behind the meaning of savant and mass, and I believe that that Genesis 3 and 4 was hinting that these 2 numbers, 3 and 4, are to be merged. So it is interesting that in Genesis chapter 4, verse 8, that it says that Cain talked with Abel, his brother. So this is pretty interesting. So I'm not gonna talk everything about it, but if you are interested, there is a book download link in the description box, but it's interesting to see when Cain representing Adam and Abel representing Eve, then so that this kind of like a clue to Adam talking. He was talking with Eve about the tree, and so this is just an assumption, but anyway. And furthermore, it was obvious that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 11 and 17, that God told Adam, the word I commanded thee. So, and it was only said to Adam, it was not to Eve at all. So that is, I believe, further proofs about Adam as being the first transgressor and not Eve. But of course, both of them, they were sinning against God. But anyway, I'm not gonna go through all that, but the message I want to get here is that in Genesis chapter 4, it also mentioned 3 murders, and the 3 murders are actually decoded as 666, and that's actually because murder is against the 6th commandment, and 666 is linked to the Great Tribulation, because of the number of the mark of the beast. And remember that I talked about number 3 and 4 in that code came up in link to the 666 as well. And so this actually not a confirmation to the use of the core reference in August, and the importance of linking to September and November to August. And I will be further explaining about the 10 Commandments analogy, because that's very important to the time August as well, and other commandments. So it was interesting that in Genesis 6 it talked about the 120, the number 120, and on a clock, you see here 120 degrees points to Tammuz, which is July's direction, and that's very important because 120 degrees is not only pointing to July and Tammuz, it's also pointing to the year 2016, because it's pointing to 4 o'clock. And 4 o'clock is also 16 minutes direction, and that's resemble 2016. And therefore, and also that during this year is also the Pentecostal number of the 7777, because of July and Tammuz, that they're both in the same direction. So that's why it's very important to see that actually 120 that was mentioned in Genesis 6 is actually also linking to the number 7. And not only that, in Genesis 7 and 8 it consists of the number 150. Both chapters mention of this number, and as you could see that 150 degrees belongs to August, and 150 degrees that's pointing to this direction of August at 5 o'clock. And it's interesting to see the Genesis 7 mention of the number 150, and Genesis 8 also mention of the same number. why, so what's the purpose behind that? So when we try to see the chapter numbers pointing to the Jewish months, be interesting to interesting to see where it locates, but as we know that the number 120 represents worldwide judgment according to Genesis chapter 6 verse 3, and the 150 degrees lands on the 5th month, and which that's the original direction, where Av is decoded as 122. So the month of Av, that's Jewish 5th month, is decoded as 122 because according to the dual alphabetical system, and which is representing the beginning of the end, because the Bible started with Genesis chapter 1, but it ended with Revelation chapter 22. So the number 122 is very important, and it's also a number of 9/11, because 11 divided by 9 equals to 1.22, etc. If we try to prove it, it's 1.22, and so this is saying that 9/11 is a very important number in relation to the beginning of the end. And so when we try to see Genesis 6 is and the number 7 here, we could actually see that the number 6, which is Elul, and number 7, which is Tisri, or it could be seen as June or July. It's interesting to see that they're related, they're like linked together, so there must be connection between the number 6 and 7, and also the number 6 and 7 is a transformation code. Explained before it, the number 6 represents the fallen state, and number 7 the perfect state, and it's like a transition number. But the thing is that Israel is always the gauge, and the Gregorian calendar is not to be relied on too much. And so remember that originally the original calendar at the time of Gregorian months of June and July is Sivan Thomas, and that's why I've been stressing about the importance of referencing August that consists of the Sivan Thomas together. So this is very important because when we're in November, it's directly going back to August, backward quadrant, further equal. They're in the same family, and also in regard to the number 7 and 8, they're connected, so we have to find a pair of 78. 150 degrees, it means that it's the beginning of the end, as hinted by the Mount of Earth. And so right now we can see that that November consists of the set of 78 together, but we could make sure we go to the calendar, well, in November. So in the time November, there is Tisri and Shushan. So that's 78. Here we could see the pair of number 78 that is connected together, and which is very important because both Genesis chapter 7 and 8 are connected because of the number 150. And the number 120 was mentioned in Acts chapter 1 verse 15 as well. There were around 120 people in the upper room, and this showing that Pentecost is related to the worldwide judgment. So Pentecost is basically about the infusion of the Holy Spirit, and thus using 2015 Pentecostal boundaries into Passover is necessary. And so this actually relating to the judgment and Pentecost, which is in other words about the transformation of bride. But anyway, with about also there's something really fascinating about Genesis chapter 7 and 8. Well, since the number 150 mentioned in each of the chapter, and there's also a stark contrast between both chapters, because in chapter 7 it's the most intensive chapter about the worldwide flood, and Genesis 8, when Noah went out of the ark into the new kind of like a new world, because the earth kind of like wiped out of his scene and all that. But so it was symbolizing that of the bride entering into the promised land. It's interesting that Genesis chapter 7 and 8 are connected through the door, and because Noah and his family went into the ark through the door, and they went out of the ark through the door in chapter 8. And the door is a pi, and also 9/11, and is amazing to see that the number 78 is related to pi. And also, if we see Enoch's calendar during the time of November, it would be the 9th month. So on November the 14th, it will be the 9th month of Enoch's calendar, and that's like creating the number 9/11 again. And so this is another 9/11 confirmation to November. And number 9 is very important because judgment started around 9 o'clock, and so the crucifixion was in the third hour, 9 a.m. And so, anyway, going to stop over here. It's getting too long, but I'm gonna continue in the next video.